Hey everybody. Um, this is the fifth and final section of Sean Matgamna's introduction to the collection The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism. The section's titled Trotsky and the Future of Socialism. I think there's like a conclusion at the end. That's like its own section, but it's like a paragraph, so I'll just read it with this. It begins with a quote. Quote, "To face reality squarely, not to seek the line of least resistance, to call things by their right names, to speak the truth to the masses, no matter how bitter it may be, not to fear obstacles, to be true in little things as in big ones, to base one's program on the logic of the class struggle, to be bold when the hour of action arrives, these are the rules." End quote. Leon Trotsky. The October Revolution showed for all time what the working class is capable of achieving, what working class socialists, democratically organized and clear-headed, can do. It proved that the idea of working class socialism is no chimera. But the real October has been buried for decades, first under the foundation stones of the autocratic Stalinist system and now under the ruins of Stalinism. Together with other bankrupt Stalinist stock, the bourgeois victors have taken over Stalinism's great lie, one of the most poisonous lies of the 20th century, that Stalinism was Bolshevism. In the war of ideas, the ghost of Stalin is enlisted now on the bourgeois side, still insisting that Stalinism was Bolshevism. The bourgeoisie proclaim that history has ended and that they are the victors, but do they believe it themselves? Marxist socialism is the conscious expression of the underlying unconscious processes of history. Those processes go on. Whatever the fond ideologues of capitalism say, the laws of capitalism uncovered by Marx have not been suspended or superseded. The class struggle goes on. It is ineradicable. Despite the triumphant crowing of the bourgeoisie, socialism now and in the period ahead has a better chance of being revived than any time in 75 years. Stalinism as a force in the working class movement is dead. That's naive. Socialism is rooted in capitalism itself. In the beginning of socialism is the critique of capitalism from the point of view of its exploited victims, the working class. The bourgeois claim to have killed socialism in this claim to have frozen history. No one can do that. All the contradictions of capital remain. The bourgeoisie must abolish the class struggle before the bourgeoisie can eliminate socialism. The bourgeoisie can't. The bourgeoisie have won the long Cold War with their Stalinist competitors, but capital has in Stalinism merely seen off a backward, inestimably more primitive competitor. Their ideological victory over, quote, socialism, end quote, is an imaginary victory. The text in this book established that what the real relationship of unfalsified socialism and historical Bolshevism was to Stalinism, and therefore what value is to be placed on the capitalist version of the old Stalinist myths and lies. Right now, the lie that Stalinism was socialism and that socialism died at the collapse of the USSR. Class struggle is ineradicable because the working class is ineradicable. Class struggle is the law of life of capitalist society because capitalism cannot do without the proletariat. Capitalism repeatedly revolutionizes technology and the organization of production. Thereby, capitalism changes the proletariat. Capitalism disrupts working class organizations by technological change and by blows in the class struggle. But the labor movement too reorganizes, redefines itself. The handloom weavers and others who made the first mass labor movement, the Chartists in the 1930s and 40s, were no longer a social force when the modern labor movement was created. The working class, renewed, changed, augmented, was. The exploitation of labor by capital, the basic cell of capitalist society, continues generating class struggle and self-renewing labor movements. It will continue until the working class abolishes capitalism. Section 2. Marx has criticized the waste, irrationality, and savage inhumanity of capitalism, but at the same time see capitalism as the necessary forerunner of socialism. Not that capitalism is vindicated is the proper conclusion from the experience of the defeat of the Russian Revolution and of the collapse of society set up by its Stalinist gravediggers, who tried in their own way and for their own reasons to, quote, bypass and, quote, dispense with, end quote, capitalism. Capitalism has not ceased to be irrational and inhuman, nor have market mechanisms ceased to be blind and wasteful, just because the failure of the Stalinist experiment in, quote, state socialism, end quote. Wage slavery and exploitation have not ceased to be at the heart of and root of capitalism. Millions of poor children die needlessly under the system every year. In the United States, the richest capitalist country in the world, thousands of people sleep on the streets or get a living only through the drug trade. Third world slum conditions exist side by side with obscene opulence in its leading cities. In Latin America, unemployment runs at 40% in many cities. Cocaine gangsters rule huge areas. Malnutrition and even starvation are widespread. That Stalinism's, quote, authoritarian state socialism, end quote, failed to bypass capitalism and emerge as a historic alternative to it does not mean that socialism has ceased to be the answer to capitalism. Stalinism was an experience on the fringes of world capitalism, arising out of the defeat of the working class revolution and stifling under its own contradictory bureaucratic regime. Stalinism was part of the prehistory of humankind, humankind must grow beyond, but still is capitalism. The idea that only the market system of the West can be the basis for democracy is the idea that only wage slavery for the masses, together with the phenomenal concentration of wealth and therefore power at the top of society, can be the basis of democracy, is a prize example of the crazy logic satirized by George Orwell, according to which war is peace and lies are truth. It has a lot in common with the old Stalinist habit of asserting that black was white, truth was lies, bureaucratic tyranny was socialism. Even such democracy as we have in the West owes its existence to decades and centuries of struggle by the working people. Democracy in capitalism is limited, imperfect, frequently not very stable. Mass self-rule by the producers, dominated neither by a bureaucratic state monopoly nor by the economic rule of the multimillionaires and their officials, is a better form of democracy. It is democracy worth the name. It is socialist democracy. The model of socialism, restored to its proper shape and color by the disintegration of Stalinism and the open disavowal of socialism by Stalinists, is the only model of socialism that ever deserved the name. The fight to organize the working class is a clear, conscious force, a class for itself, to break bourgeois state power and abolish wage slavery. Quote, to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to win the battle of democracy, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the capitalist state, i.e. of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all, end quote. Marx, The Communist Manifesto. Socialism will revive as a mass force. The only questions are what sort of socialism and how soon will it arrive, and how free will it be from the defects that have rendered it a nullity, or worse, for most of the 20th century, since the crushing of the Bolshevik Revolution in the 1920s. That depends to a considerable extent on the socialists themselves, on what they do. That in turn depends greatly on how we come to terms with the 20th century experience of socialism. In the 1880s in Britain, less than 200 socialist pioneers set to work to win over the working class, to expand the labor movement and transform it into a socialist workers' movement. Their inadequacies need not detain us here. Work like that will be done again, and we start on a very much higher level, with a mass trade union movement. Here, tradition is very important. Tradition is our collective memory. The Marxists are the memory of the working class. The historical memory of a class is worked and reworked, learned from or forgotten, lost and regained, relearned and reinterpreted, and put to work as part of the political capital of the movement. Much depends on the socialists, not, quote, history or, quote, capitalist crisis, end quote, nor any mechanical agency will do it, but living, conscious, determined, remembering people. Section 3. This book is a relentless criticism of the, quote, Trotskyist, end quote, tradition that for decades has, in unhindered permutations, been the most widespread variant of revolutionary socialism. It is criticism from within that current. A large part of the introduction is a systematic criticism of Trotsky's thought on the USSR all through the 1930s, but it is Trotskyist criticism of Leon Trotsky, and it is, I hope, loyal criticism in the spirit of Trotsky himself. The publishers of this book are proud to name themselves in politics with Trotsky's name. However, we refuse to mistake piety for political rigor or mimicry and mummery for fidelity to Trotsky. Trotsky mimicked no one, and he had the contempt of a reasoning human being for all mummery and all mumbo-jumbo. Trotsky made grievous mistakes on the USSR. In the light of history, this is indisputable. The serious Trotskyists are those who critically apply themselves to rectify and renewing the ideological fabric with the help of which a renewed mass revolutionary socialist movement will be built. That demands a critical and self-critical appraisal of the history of socialism. Trotsky once asked rhetorically, "What do we do when the, quote, good old books, end quote, fail to give the necessary answers?" To try to manage with one's own head. After Trotsky's death, his mistakes in the USSR were frozen in the work of pious but uncomprehending or irresponsible disciples into something inimical to his whole spirit. Trotsky was thereby lost. The real Trotsky was both the hero of the workers' victory and the embodiment of the Russian workers' resistance to the Stalinist counter-revolution. Trotsky is not only the The real Trotsky was both the hero of the workers' victory and the embodiment of the Russian workers' resistance to the Stalinist counter-revolution. Trotsky is not only the Trotsky, but also the Spartacus and the Blanqui of the 20th century. Referring to Trotsky, Blanqui says a lot about the politics of this book. Trotsky personified a whole epoch of proletarian culture, tradition, experience, and unbreakable belief in the rationale and humanist traditions of Marxism and of the proletariat. Trotsky has come to symbolize and personify revolutionary communism itself, the elemental drive for freedom of the slaves of capitalist society. Trotsky's writings embody the lesson of working-class struggles that ended in unprecedented victory and of struggles that ended in catastrophic defeat. Trotsky's writings constitute our best link with the Russian Revolution and the early Comintern. Here Trotsky is the Buonarroti of the 20th century, the passer on of a great tradition. I think Buonarroti was the collaborator of Blanqui. I'm not sure. The link between the past and its future renewed on a higher level. Trotsky's writings, mistakes on the USSR aside, embody the lessons of the greatest struggles in working class history. They are an irreplaceable part of the political, theoretical, and moral resources of extant socialism. But Trotsky's legacy will necessarily have to be assimilated critically and reworked in the light of new experiences and new realities, just as Trotsky himself reworked and developed the heritage of his teachers. As, for example, in the theory of permanent revolution, he can only be reappropriated critically. Trotsky, rescued from the posthumous captivities in which for so long he has been imprisoned by well-meaning disciples, offer guidance, tradition, and an incomparable example. Trotsky cannot think for socialists today, but he can help us learn to think better for ourselves, not misplaced piety, loyal Marxist criticism. It is in this spirit and to contribute to that work that people who think of themselves as Trotsky's people have subjected Trotsky's writings on the USSR to severe criticism. Trotsky is infinitely more than his mistakes. Section 4. History is unending struggle, the economic, political, and ideological. The truth of history is on the side of socialism. This volume will, we hope, make that clear. That the bourgeoisie should now be triumphant is natural. It is short-sighted. Around the globe, wherever capitalism has created a modern economy, it has raised up a militant working class, in Korea and Indonesia, for example. Even when most successful capitalism only creates its own gravediggers, the paths of capitalist glory lead but to only create... Paths of capitalist glory lead but to the grave. Class war goes on. What socialists do in this war can be decisive. What they are able to do depends on how they see the world, how they come to terms with the past, how well they resist the repression of the conservative anti-socialist classes. In short, how they fare in the battle of ideas. The ideas in this book are a contribution to that battle. And this is the little thing that's like the end of it. The purpose of this collection. This is like section 6. This collection has a number of purposes. We aim to put into circulation certain key documents of revolutionary Marxism, long lost to anyone not prepared to rummage in libraries and unavailable even in most good libraries. Though some of the publications in which these texts first appeared had a small circulation in Britain and Ireland, even the most important of them, such as Is Russia a Workers' State, were never printed or given any decent circulation in Britain. Neither was Shachtman's collection of articles, The Bureaucratic Revolution, published in 1962. Without being too fanciful and indulging in no more than a little permissible exaggeration, one could call these documents the Dead Sea Scrolls of 20th century revolutionary Marxism. We want to provide an approach to the real history of Trotskyism, that is, of unfalsified Bolshevism and Marxism and its post-Trotsky mutations, to give as comprehensive as possible an account of the dissident Trotskyists who continued long along the basic lines indicated by Trotsky in the, quote, USSR in war, end quote, and the trajectory of his concrete descriptions and political responses to the USSR from the Theory of Degeneration, published in 1933, to The Comintern of the GPU, published in 1940. We want to put these texts into the living stream of a reviving left, one of whose prerequisites is a proper coming to terms with the experience of the Russian Revolution and its gravedigger Stalin, and with its own real political history. It is not a matter here of imagining that one can go and find and put it on a tradition, like an old garment found in an attic. Revolutionary politics is not like that. It is not a Disney theme park where you can choose. Today we are in the Wild West, or the Middle Ages, or the American or French revolutions. Maoists in the 1960s and 70s did that with various past periods of the Stalinist movement. The third period, the Northern Ireland Communist Party's World War II Unionist period, popular frontism, it does not work. Real political tradition is a living thing, made up of the practice and assumptions and mutual relations of active militants. Footnote. For example, the tradition of Workers' Liberty / Phoenix Press is an evolution from the tradition of James P. Cannon, an evolution that has led us to criticize and rethink, but not to repudiate and disavow. End footnote. These texts are an irreplaceable element in the work of re-elaborating a living Trotskyist tradition. It should not be thought that one has to take or leave the political legacy of the Workers' Party and the Independent Socialist League as a whole. Nothing could be more foreign to the spirit of that organization. The Workers' Party was not a, quote, monolithic, end quote, party, nor are there organizations of those who want to learn from it. For example, some of those who have worked with me to produce this volume would find, quote, state capitalism, end quote, though not as understood by the Workers' Party minority, a better framework for understanding the Stalinist states than, quote, bureaucratic collectivism, end quote. There are things to criticize and reject in that tradition. They got the overall perspective of Stalinism wrong. From our vantage point, it is plain that Trotsky and then Shachtman until 1946 or 47 were right to regard the Stalinist phenomenon as an aberration in the broad sweep of history. It is understandable that the spread of Stalinism after 1944 to a further sixth of the earth would have led Shachtman to misunderstand. Nevertheless, it is plain now that the Stalinist systems emerged as parallels to capitalism, not as capitalism's successor. They were historical blind alleys. Apart from the historical importance of some of the pieces reprinted here, the labor movement can learn a very great deal from these texts about what living Marxism is and is not. All right, so that's the end of Sean Matgamna's extended introduction to The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, Volume 1. Thanks for listening.